Welcome back after the break. You're watching Indus News and I'm Fiza Jamal with our latest stories in detail. We start from India, where New Delhi's decision to revoke occupied Kashmir special status has been challenged in India's Supreme Court. Kashmiri politician Shah Faisal and activist Shehla Rashid's pleas against scrapping of Article 370 will be heard by the court tomorrow. Shah Faisal and Shehla Rashid have been raising their voices against the complete clampdown in the occupied territory. Earlier, a criminal case was filed against Shehla Rashid while Faisal was detained by Indian authorities for their activism. Meanwhile, India's crushing curfew in the valley has entered its 23rd day with a total communication blackout still in place. In Tehran, President Hassan Rouhani says Iran has no intention of talking to the U.S. until it lifts all unilateral sanctions. This comes after U.S. President Donald Trump said he is ready to meet Rouhani in a few weeks to end the confrontation over the 2015 nuclear deal. In a speech, Rouhani said Tehran has never wanted nuclear weapons and is always ready to hold talks. He also said Iran will continue to scale back its commitments to the nuclear pact if illegal U.S. sanctions are not lifted. Earlier, President Trump said Rouhani is a great negotiator, but Washington cannot let Tehran have nuclear weapons.
If the circumstances were correct or the right, I would certainly agree to that. But in the meantime, they have to be good players. You understand what that means. And they can't do what they were saying they're going to do, because if they do that, they're going to be met with really very violent force. We have no choice.
As more and more world leaders have expressed concern over rising tensions between the United States and Iran over the 2015 nuclear deal, Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Kono says his country will try to help ease tensions in the Middle East. He was meeting his Iranian counterpart Javad Zarif, who called on him in Tokyo. More in this report.
How are you? Very good.
Zarif kicked off his Asian tour in Beijing on Monday, presenting a 25-year plan to cement Iran's ties with its biggest Asian trading partner amid U.S. sanctions. During his meeting with the Japanese foreign minister, Zarif said the two countries have special interests in the security of the energy market and stability in the Gulf.
It is necessary for us to engage. Also, Iran and Japan share common views on nuclear non-proliferation, and we need to have conversations about how best to maintain nuclear non-proliferation.
Being a close ally of the United States, Japan is trying to reduce tensions in the Persian Gulf.
Worried about tension in the Middle East, and we hope to make some diplomatic efforts to ease the tension. So we wanted to have a direct and a frank conversation with you today.
Zarif's visit to Japan comes on the heels of a surprise visit to the G7 summit in France over the weekend. Iran's top diplomat didn't meet US President Donald Trump, but French diplomats said the presence of the two men in the same place at least sparked hopes of a détente.
We now go to Singapore, where we are joined by political analyst James Dorsey. Thank you, Mr. Dorsey, for your time. So the surprise visit of Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif to the G7 summit raised expectations of a diplomatic breakthrough with the US, but President Rouhani's reaction suggests otherwise. What is your take on this?
Pleasure to be with you. I think what you're seeing is both the United States and Iran do not want a military conflict. And both parties, given unease across the globe with the mounting tension in the Gulf, want to be seen to be willing to talk to one another. But if you look closely at what both President Trump and President Rouhani said, they haven't really moved an inch from their positions. So, with other words, Rouhani's position is Iran will only negotiate if the United States lifts the sanctions that were imposed on it after the United States walked away from the nuclear agreement. And President Trump said that Iran would have to agree to lifting its or eradicating its ballistic missiles program, not just its nuclear program, and between the lines suggested that Iran would also have to break its ties to various proxies in the Middle East. Now, there is no way that the United States at this point is going to lift sanctions, nor is there any way that Iran is going to agree to Trump's terms. What is a possible way out would be that if the United States were to ease pressure on Iran, for example, by granting various countries waivers for the import of Iranian oil.
Right. Mr. Dorsey, also Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif visited China yesterday and met with his counterpart there. What are the chances that both countries can make a new anti-U.S. axis in the region?
Well, I don't know if there's a question of an anti-U.S. axis. China and Iran have very close relations. Iran is very important to China, and certainly China is increasingly important to Iran, particularly given the sanctions. Both Iran has always been an anti-U.S. regime. Relations between the Chinese and the Americans are deteriorating significantly because of trade and many other issues. I don't think it's a question of a new axis being formed as much as U.S. policy driving the Iranians even closer to the Chinese.
And Mr. Dorsey, another issue that the U.S. is dealing with is the peace in Afghanistan. Is Iran's cooperation needed in resolving this issue as well?
Well, I think that Iran's role is going to be secondary or minimal at this point. Obviously, Iran has a spoiling power. It can disrupt things, but Iran is not really a player in the negotiations, even though it certainly will want to protect the interests of the Hazaras, the Shiite Muslims in Afghanistan, in whatever settlement may be reached.
Thank you very much for your time, Mr. James Dorsey. That was Mr. James Dorsey joining us from Singapore. Moving on to the next story, Taliban spokesperson Sohail Shaheen says the final points of a peace agreement with the United States are being finalized. The fifth day of dialogue between the two parties has just begun in Doha. Earlier, U.S. envoy Zalmay Khalilzad rejected reports suggesting Washington would withdraw support to Afghan government forces after a peace deal with the Taliban. Khalilzad said all parties have agreed the country's future will be determined by intra-Afghan talks. And fresh clashes between rebels and government forces have killed 53 combatants on both sides in northwestern Syria. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said that the fighting has killed 23 government soldiers and 20 rebels. It said the clashes broke out after rebels attacked government forces' positions east of the town of Khan Sheikhun. Earlier, Russian and Syrian government airstrikes killed 12 civilians in the northwestern province of Idlib. 27 others were wounded in the bombardment. Tensions are rising between Israel and Hezbollah once again after 2 Israeli drones crashed in Beirut. Now UN peacekeepers are patrolling Lebanon streets while Israeli jets patrol the border. But residents remain defiant, going about their business as usual, saying they are ready to protect their land themselves. You'll find the details in this report. The threat of war is looming over Lebanon once more. On Sunday, Hezbollah issued a stern warning to Israel, saying it would attack Israeli troops on the Lebanese border if it continued to violate the country's airspace. The sentiment behind the warning has been echoed by the residents of Lebanon's border towns.
The resistance is here, and as long as the resistance is protecting us, we will be just fine. The Israelis have become scared of us. We stand on the border fence. Do they dare stand? Times have changed.
Many say they didn't leave their lands during the July war of 2006, and they will not flee if they are attacked again today.
Everybody fears war. At the end of the day, that's natural. There's no one that is not afraid for himself and his family, but at the end of the day, the choice is living in humiliation or dying with your head held high. And we will die with our heads held high.
Lebanon's President Michel Aoun has said his country has a right to defend itself and likened Israeli drone strikes to an act of war. Israeli troops posted along the border with Lebanon are also on high alert. 100,200 Lebanese citizens died in the month-long July war 13 years ago. Saudi-led coalition forces have shot down a Houthi drone launched towards the kingdom from Yemen. Coalition spokesman Turki al-Maliki says the drone was destroyed in Yemeni airspace. In a statement, he said the drone was aimed at the southwestern city of Khamis Mushaith. Al-Maliki also said continued attacks by Houthis will end in failure. Beijing has accused the U.S. of hyping up the South China Sea situation after the Pentagon said China is interfering in waters claimed by Vietnam. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Geng Shuang said the U.S. has made warrantless criticism against China. According to ship tracking data, a Chinese survey vessel extended its activities to an area closer to Vietnam's coast, angering the U.S. and Australia. The vessel first entered Vietnam's exclusive economic zone last month, triggering a standoff between Vietnam and China. China demands that Beijing remove the vessel. The two countries are engaged in a dispute over the potentially energy-rich waters, which also happen to be a busy shipping lane. China has expressed strong reservations over the G7 statement on the current unrest in Hong Kong. The G7 leaders meeting in France backed Hong Kong's autonomy as laid out in the 1984 agreement between Britain and China. China's Foreign Ministry spokesman Geng Shuang says the G7 is meddling and harboring evil intentions for Hong Kong. He also says that Beijing has repeatedly said the affair is China's internal matter. Hong Kong has been racked by more than 2 months of protests over a controversial extradition bill. And now I'll take a very short break. Don't go anywhere. In China, Tibetan nomads play a central role in ecosystem protection as this preserves their way of life. Now they are working with conservationists to protect the source of China's Yellow River. Details here.
For centuries, the peak of ANNEXATION has been a destination for Buddhist pilgrimage. But as global temperatures rise, the mountain's snow cap has also started melting. Because the mountain's glaciers are the main source of China's Yellow River, this could have serious ecological consequences.
After our observation and interviews with the local people who are living here, and there are big changes with the glaciers, and the glaciers are retreating within the last 10 years.
The issue is close to the hearts of the people of Qinghai province. Tibetan folklore says once ANNEXATION's glaciers disappear, the god of the mountain will be gone, and so will his blessings. That's why when environmental NGOs started working to preserve the glacier, Tibetan nomads were quick to jump on board.
When there's more snow on the mountain, it makes me very happy. But when there's less snow, it makes me really sad.
Everyone contributes in whatever way they can. Tibetan nomad Sangdan regularly scans the mountain for signs of snow leopards, an important indicator of the status of ANNEXATION's ecosystem. Scientists and conservationists say cultural values and religious beliefs are pivotal in preserving the source of the Yellow River.
Decades ago, scientists predicted robots would take over mundane human tasks. In Singapore, evidence to support this claim can be seen as autonomous buses drive tourists around the coastal district of Sentosa. More in this report.
Under the sweltering Singapore sun, an autonomous shuttle bus drives up by itself and allows a line of tourists to board. The island state, ranked second behind the United States in its preparedness for driverless vehicles, has begun to tentatively test a fleet of shuttles. Singapore's testing of the technology is being closely watched as tech firms and automakers race to build self-driving cars.
Authorities are looking forward for this, and in fact they are very supportive in our development, and they also give us a lot of help in establishing all the road regulation and establishing all the testing procedure. Like the TR68 that recently they published this year, they actually help us to bring the autonomous system into the public faster.
On Monday, the first day of the trial, there were almost as many bus stewards as passengers, making sure seat belts were tightly fastened. After a series of mishaps at home and abroad with the new technology, the company behind the latest test says it is taking no chances with passenger safety. For driverless vehicle operators, safety is crucial.
I have to look out for traffic, any hazards, which some drivers, they violate the rules, which we need to take extra precautions because they doesn't know how these autonomous buses are working on. And most importantly, I have to ensure my passengers are on safety.
People are expecting to find out soon when the buses will be part of everyday scenery around the city.
Let's take you to the world of business, where France says it will scrap recently imposed taxes on US tech giants as soon as the world's developed economies find a way to uniformly tax them. This comes after French and US officials reached a draft agreement on the sidelines of the G7 summit yesterday. US President Donald Trump has threatened to impose retaliatory tariffs on French wines. President Emmanuel Macron says France will keep its taxes on big tech firms until the OECD establishes standardized rules. He said France will refund any overpaid taxes since the OECD framework is in place. The framework is expected to be unveiled next year. A U.S. court has fined pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson $572 million. The court found the company liable for fueling an opioid addiction epidemic in Oklahoma State by deceptively marketing painkillers. The court ruled the drug maker's actions compromised the health and safety of thousands of citizens. It said the payment will be used for the care and treatment of opioid addicts in Oklahoma. The state's Attorney General Michael Hunter said the pharma giant's misleading marketing led to a surge of overdose deaths in Oklahoma. Sadly, I didn't wear my nice shoes today since it's raining outside in Lahore, but let's see what the weather is looking like where you live. Well, these are all the latest stories and details I have for you this hour. Stay tuned to Indus News for further updates.